prisoner 16324. That's all he is now. On July 23, 2025, Bryan Kohberger was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences for the brutal murders of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. He stabbed them at least 150 times combined. He left them to die in their own beds. He showed no remorse. The judge told him, "You are now the property of the state of Idaho." But prison? Prison isn't going the way Kohberger planned, because the man who thought he was smarter than everyone is now complaining about bananas. This is the story of Bryan Kohberger's prison nightmare, and how Idaho is desperately trying to get rid of him. Before we dive into subscribe and hit that notification bell, here at Forensic Disconnect, we unlock the cases that deserve to be remembered. We don't sensationalize. We don't exploit. We educate with respect for victims and facts from verified sources. New investigations every week. Now let's get into what's happening behind bars with one of America's most notorious killers. Let's go back to that courtroom in Boise, Idaho. July 23, 2025. The air was thick with tension. Victim after victim's family member prepared to face the man who had destroyed their lives. Bryan Kohberger sat at the defense table, expressionless, wearing a button-down shirt and tie, his hands folded, his face blank. The same cold, emotionless stare he'd maintained throughout the entire legal process. Dylan Mortensen, the surviving roommate who saw him that night, the young woman who locked herself in her room frozen with fear as a masked intruder walked past her, approached the podium. Her voice shook as she spoke. She told the court that Kohberger didn't just take their lives, he took the light they carried into every room. "He took away my ability to trust the world around me," she said through tears. "What he did shattered me in places I didn't know could break. I was barely 19 when he did this." The courtroom was silent except for the sound of crying. Family members clutched tissues. Some couldn't look at Kohberger. Others stared at him, willing him to feel something, anything. Steve Goncalves, Kaylee's father, a man who had spent nearly 3 years searching for justice for his daughter, stood up when his turn came. He didn't walk to the podium. Instead, he turned it, physically rotated the entire podium so that it faced Bryan Kohberger directly. He wanted to look the killer in the eyes. "Today, you've lost control," Steve said, his voice steady but filled with barely contained rage. "The world is watching because of the kids, not because of you. Nobody cares about you." He spoke about how quickly his family and community had rallied together with investigators to find his daughter's killer. He called Kohberger careless and foolish. He said the evidence against him was overwhelming because Kohberger had made mistake after mistake. The meticulous planning, the supposed intelligence, all of it had crumbled under the weight of DNA evidence and digital forensics. Christy Goncalves, Kaylee's mother, delivered what many considered the most powerful statement of the day. She looked directly at Kohberger and said, "May you continue to live your life in misery. You are officially the property of the state of Idaho." Those words hung in the air. Property, not a person with rights and freedoms. Property, owned by the state, controlled by the state, for the rest of his natural life. Judge Stephen Hippler, who had presided over the case with measured professionalism, delivered the sentence without hesitation. 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for the 4 counts of first-degree murder, plus 10 additional years for burglary, for entering that house with the intent to kill. No appeals, no parole hearings, no second chances, no possibility of ever walking free. The rest of his natural life behind bars. Kohberger showed no reaction, no tears, no outburst, nothing. He simply nodded when the judge asked if he understood the sentence. "Yes," he said quietly. It was one of the few words he'd spoken in court. Within hours of that sentencing, the Idaho Department of Correction took custody of Bryan Kohberger. He was no longer the defendant, no longer the accused. He was now prisoner 163214, and his destination was already determined. The Idaho Maximum Security Institution in Kuna, Idaho, located about 20 minutes outside of Boise. This isn't just any prison. This isn't a medium security facility where inmates have some freedoms, some privileges. This is where Idaho sends its most dangerous, most violent, most despised criminals. The facility houses 535 inmates, all of them classified as what corrections officials delicately call the state's most volatile male residents. Let me be more direct. These are killers, rapists, child abusers, gang leaders, and death row inmates. This is where Idaho sends people it never wants to release. The facility itself is imposing. Double perimeter fence topped with coils of razor wire that glint in the sunlight. electronic detection systems that trigger alarms if anything crosses certain boundaries, guard towers positioned at strategic points around the compound, security cameras everywhere, armed guards, steel doors that slam shut with a finality that echoes through concrete hallways, and now, Bryan Kohberger. But before we go inside those walls, before we talk about what his life looks like now, let me tell you about the man being sent there. Because understanding who Bryan Kohberger was before prison helps us understand why prison is destroying him now. Bryan Christopher Kohberger was born in November 1994, making him 30 years old when he was arrested in December 2022. He grew up in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, a small community in the Pocono Mountains. By most accounts, he had a relatively normal childhood. He wasn't the kid who tortured animals or set fires, the typical warning signs we associate with future violent offenders. He was quiet, socially awkward, and according to some who knew him, he struggled to fit in. But he was also intelligent. That much was clear. He excelled academically and developed an interest in criminal justice and criminology. After high school, Kohberger attended Northampton Community College before transferring to DeSales University in Center Valley, Pennsylvania. It was at DeSales that Kohberger really began to focus on criminal justice. He earned a bachelor's degree and then stayed for a master's degree in criminal justice. His thesis? The use of technology in crime investigations. He was fascinated by how criminals were caught, how evidence was collected, how forensics worked. Dr. Catherine Ramsland, a renowned criminologist who taught Kohberger during his time at DeSales, later described his graduate work as pretty ordinary. Nothing stood out to her as particularly brilliant or concerning. He was just another student interested in crime. After completing his master's degree in 2022, Kohberger was accepted into the PhD program in criminal justice and criminology at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. Washington State University is located just 8 miles from Moscow, Idaho, where the victims lived. 8 miles, a 12-minute drive. Kohberger moved to Pullman in August 2022 and began his doctoral studies. He was also hired as a teaching assistant in the Criminal Justice Department, which meant he taught undergraduate classes. He had a salary, tuition benefits, health insurance, and on-campus housing. Everything was provided, and he was teaching future law enforcement officers about crime while planning to commit one of the most brutal mass murders in Idaho history. Fellow students and colleagues later described Kohberger as socially awkward, intense, and sometimes inappropriate. There were complaints. At least 13 formal complaints during the fall 2022 semester alone. Female students and staff reported that he made them uncomfortable. He would block exits during conversations. He would invade personal space. He would follow women to their vehicles. One female graduate student reported that he repeatedly approached her in her office and refused to leave unless she had a conversation with him. She said he cornered her as she left work, and even after she turned down his request for a relationship, he continued harassing her. Another student kept a tally board in the office to track Kohberger's discriminatory comments. A tally board. That's how frequent and concerning his behavior was. Faculty members were worried enough that one employee advised coworkers to send emails with the subject line 911 if they were ever in a situation with Kohberger where they felt threatened. Think about that. A teaching assistant in a criminology department was so concerning that his own colleagues created an emergency protocol for dealing with him. But despite all of this, despite 13 formal complaints, despite the concerns, despite the warning signs, Washington State University did not remove him from campus. They did not revoke his teaching position. They did not suspend him. He remained employed, housed, and given access to students and faculty. And on November 13, 2022, Bryan Kohberger drove from Pullman, Washington to Moscow, Idaho. He entered a house at 1122 King Road, a 3-story rental home where University of Idaho students lived, and he attacked 4 people as they slept. Kaylee Goncalves, 21 years old, a senior who was weeks away from graduating and moving to Texas for a marketing job. 38 stab wounds, 24 of them to her head, face, neck, and scalp. Madison Mogen, 21 years old, Kaylee's best friend since 6th grade. They had planned to move to Texas together. 28 stab wounds. Xana Kernodle, 20 years old, a junior working her way through school. 67 stab wounds. She fought back. She had defensive wounds on her hands and arms. She was awake when he attacked her. She tried to survive. And Ethan Chapin, 20 years old, a freshman who was just visiting his girlfriend Xana that night. He didn't even live in the house. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. 17 stab wounds. 150 stab wounds combined. in approximately 15 minutes, with a single 7-inch K-bar style knife. The coroner who examined the bodies said that a lot of force was used. The wounds were deep, brutal, fatal. Some victims had wounds concentrated on their heads and faces, which forensic experts say indicates overkill, a level of violence beyond what's necessary to kill. It suggests rage or a desire to dehumanize the victims. After killing 4 people, Bryan Kohberger left the scene, but he made a critical mistake. He left behind a tan leather K-bar knife sheath on the bed next to Madison's body, and on the snap button of that sheath was his touch DNA. That single piece of evidence, that one mistake, would lead investigators directly to him. But Kohberger didn't know that yet. As far as he was concerned, he'd gotten away with it. 6 hours after committing quadruple murder, at 10:31 a.m. on November 13, 2022, Bryan Kohberger stood in his bathroom and took a selfie. He was wearing a button-down shirt and had Bluetooth earbuds in his ears, and he was smiling, giving a thumbs up. Prosecutors would later introduce this photo at his guilty plea hearing. Steve Goncalves, Kaylee's father, called it a trophy photo. Kohberger had returned to the crime scene hours after the murders, realized no one had called 911 yet, and took a photo celebrating what he thought was his perfect crime. But DNA doesn't lie, and genetic genealogy doesn't forget. Investigators took the DNA from the knife sheath and ran it through public ancestry databases. They created a family tree. They narrowed down suspects. And they identified Bryan Christopher Kohberger. On December 30th, 2022, nearly 7 weeks after the murders, police arrested Kohberger at his parents' home in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. He'd driven across the country for the holidays, and when police arrived, they found him wearing latex exam gloves. He was putting trash into Ziploc bags. He was desperately trying to eliminate any DNA evidence, but it was far too late. Police had already gone through his parents' trash days earlier and found a Q-tip that contained DNA matching his father. That was the confirmation they needed. Kohberger was extradited to Idaho on January 4th, 2023. He was held at Latah County Jail throughout the legal proceedings. For 2.5 years, he maintained his innocence. His defense team filed motion after motion. They tried to suppress evidence. They tried to change venues. They tried to block the death penalty. They fought hard, but the evidence was overwhelming. The DNA on the knife sheath. The cell phone records showing his phone had pinged near the victim's house at least 12 times in the months before the murders, always late at night. The cell phone records showing his phone was in airplane mode during the exact window of the murders, then turned back on as he drove back to Pullman. The white Hyundai Elantra registered to him that matched witness descriptions and surveillance footage. The Amazon purchase records showing he'd bought a Ka-Bar knife 8 months before the murders. The witness who saw a masked man with bushy eyebrows, matching Kohberger's description in the house that night. The lack of any alibi. The attempts to clean his car obsessively after the murders. The attempts to destroy evidence. It was all there. And Kohberger's defense team knew that if this case went to trial, he would almost certainly be convicted and sentenced to death. So on June 30th, 2025, prosecutors offered a plea deal. Plead guilty to all charges except 4 consecutive life sentences without parole and avoid the death penalty. Kohberger's trial was scheduled to begin in August 2025, but on July 2nd, 2025, he appeared in court and took the deal. Judge Stephen Hippler asked him directly, "Did you kill and murder each of these victims willingly, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought?" For each victim, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, Kohberger responded with a single word: yes, 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 yes. 4 yeses, 4 admissions of guilt, 4 lives he acknowledged taking. By accepting the plea deal, Kohberger waived his right to appeal. He waived his right to request a more lenient sentence. He agreed that this was final. And now, 21 days later, he was being sentenced. 4 consecutive life sentences, no parole, no hope of release, and immediate transfer to Idaho Maximum Security Institution. July 29th, 2025, 6 days after sentencing. Bryan Kohberger arrives at Idaho Maximum Security Institution. He's processed like any other inmate. Mugshot taken, fingerprints recorded, personal belongings confiscated. Prison uniform issued, inmate number assigned 163214, and then he's escorted to J Block, the long-term restrictive housing unit. Solitary confinement. Let me paint you a very detailed picture of what that means, because most people don't truly understand what solitary confinement looks like day to day, hour by hour. Your cell is 12 feet long and 7 feet wide. 84 square feet. For context, that's smaller than most people's bathrooms. The walls are concrete, painted institutional gray. The floor is concrete. The ceiling is concrete. There's a metal bed frame bolted to the floor with a thin mattress. There's a stainless steel toilet attached to the wall. There's a stainless steel sink. There's a small metal desk or shelf bolted to the wall. And that's it. No windows to the outside world. The only window is a small reinforced glass panel in the steel door so guards can observe you. There's a slot in the door for food trays to be passed through. There's a fluorescent light fixture in the ceiling that's controlled by guards, not by you. 23 hours a day, you are in that cell, alone, with nothing but your thoughts, no cellmate to talk to, no television, no radio, no phone calls except through the monitored JPay system, nothing. You wake up when the lights come on, which is controlled by the guards. Breakfast arrives through the slot in your door. You eat sitting on your bed or at the small metal desk. The tray is taken away through the slot. You have a few books if you've ordered them from the prison library. You have a pencil and paper if you've requested it. And you have hours, long, empty hours. You can't see other inmates. You can hear them sometimes. Voices echoing through the ventilation system, doors slamming, guards walking past. But you can't see anyone. You can't have a conversation. You're alone. At some point during the day, usually in the afternoon, guards come to your door. They tell you to turn around and put your hands through the slot in the door. They cuff your hands behind your back. Then they open the door. They attach ankle shackles. You shuffle out of your cell, your movement restricted by chains. 2 guards escort you, one on each side, down the hallway to the outdoor recreation area. The recreation area is a concrete yard surrounded by 30-foot concrete walls. You can see the sky, a patch of blue or gray depending on the weather. That's your only connection to the outside world. You have 1 hour. You can walk in circles. You can do push-ups or sit-ups if you want. You can stand and look at the sky. And then your hour is up. The guards come back. They cuff you again. They escort you back to your cell. They remove the restraints through the door slot. The door slams shut, and you're alone again. Every other day, you're allowed to shower. Same process. Hands cuffed through the slot. Door opens. Ankle shackles attached. Escorted to the shower room. Uncuffed, but the guards are right outside. You have 10 minutes. Cold water or lukewarm at best. A small bar of soap. A thin towel. You shower under the watch of security cameras. 10 minutes pass. Cuffed again. Escorted back. Door slams shut. Alone again. This is every single day. Day after day. Week after week. Month after month. Year after year. No variation. No surprise. No change. Just the cell. The hour in the yard. The shower every other day. And the endless hours in between. The Idaho Department of Correction did provide some access to the outside world. There's JPay, an electronic system that allows inmates to send emails and make video calls if they have money in their commissary account, and if anyone wants to communicate with them. There's access to religious services, though in solitary confinement, that usually means a chaplain visits your cell rather than you attending a group service. There's commissary, where you can order snacks, toiletries, writing materials if you have money. Kohberger's family presumably puts money in his account. But even with these small privileges, the reality is clear. This is solitary confinement. This is isolation. This is sensory deprivation. And this is what the rest of Bryan Kohberger's life looks like. 128 inmates live in J Block, all of them in single-person cells, all of them in long-term restrictive housing. Some are there because they're too dangerous for general population. They've assaulted other inmates or guards. They're gang leaders who would continue to control operations even behind bars. Some are there for their own protection. They're sex offenders or child killers who would be murdered within hours in general population. Some are there because they're high profile. Their cases attracted too much media attention, and their presence in general population would cause disruptions. Bryan Kohberger is all three. He's considered dangerous because of the brutality of his crimes. He's a child killer, 4 college students who were barely adults, and he's high profile. His case made international headlines. Everyone knows his name. Everyone knows what he did. And in prison, where hierarchies are everything, where reputation means survival, Kohberger is at the very bottom. The Idaho Department of Correction gave him what they give every inmate in J Block: a cell, meals, basic hygiene, medical care when needed, access to JPay, access to commissary. But they could not give him what he wanted most, what he'd had his entire life, what had defined his entire personality: control. Investigative reporter Howard Blum, who has covered many high-profile criminal cases, explained it perfectly in an interview with the Daily Mail. "Murder is about control," he said, "and prison is the ultimate situation where you have no control." Think about that. Bryan Kohberger spent months planning the Idaho murders. He studied the house. He drove by at least 12 times in the middle of the night. He picked the time, the method, the victims. He was in control of every detail. Even after the murders, he tried to control the narrative. He cleaned his car. He threw away evidence. He acted normal. He thought he could control the investigation. And when he was arrested, he tried to control the legal process. He stayed silent. He let his lawyers fight. He maintained his innocence for 2.5 years. Control, control, control. But in prison, Bryan Kohberger controls nothing. He doesn't control when the lights turn on or off. He doesn't control when meals are served. He doesn't control when he leaves his cell. He doesn't control who's in the cells around him. He doesn't control the temperature, the noise level, the daily schedule. He doesn't even control what kind of food is on his tray or what fruit is served. And for a man whose entire identity was built on being smarter than everyone, on planning every detail, on staying in control, this loss of control is destroying him. And it started almost immediately. Days after arriving at Idaho Maximum Security Institution, Bryan Kohberger discovered the Resident Concern Form. This is the formal grievance system that allows inmates to file complaints about conditions, treatment, or procedures. It's meant to ensure that inmates have a voice if something genuinely wrong happens, if their rights are being violated, if there's abuse or neglect. It's an important part of the system. But Bryan Kohberger began using it for everything. His very first complaint came within days of arrival. The problem? He couldn't access JPay. JPay is the electronic system that inmates use for communication and commissary. It allows them to send emails to approved contacts, make video calls, receive money, and order items from the commissary like snacks, hygiene products, writing materials. Kohberger wanted to place what he called a full commissary order. He was frustrated that the system wasn't working yet. A corrections officer responded to his complaint with patience. "Sir, it takes time to set up JPay access when you transfer to a new facility. Your account needs to be created. Your information needs to be verified. Approved contacts need to be added to your list. This process typically takes several days to a week. Please be patient." But Kohberger didn't want to be patient. He wanted what he wanted when he wanted it. This wasn't about a genuine problem or a violation of rights. This was about inconvenience. This was about things not happening on his schedule. And it was just the beginning. August 13th, 2025, less than 3 weeks after arriving, another complaint. Kohberger had submitted what's called a supply request. Inmates can request basic supplies like soap, toothpaste, toilet paper, writing materials through official request forms. Kohberger submitted his request, but claimed he never received his supply bag. He filed a formal complaint. Staff looked into it and responded, again with patience. "Sir, supply requests are processed and delivered on Sundays. Today is Wednesday. Your request was submitted on Monday, which means it will be processed this coming Sunday. This is standard procedure. This is something you should have been informed about during orientation. This is something every inmate knows after their first week." But Kohberger filed the complaint anyway. These weren't the complaints of a man who was being mistreated or whose rights were being violated. These weren't complaints about abuse, neglect, or dangerous conditions. These were complaints about inconvenience, about procedures, about things not happening fast enough for him. These were the complaints of a man who was used to being in control, who was used to things working the way he expected, who couldn't accept that he was now just another inmate in a system that doesn't revolve around him. Prison staff were already growing weary of him. But the complaints that really made headlines, the complaints that turned Bryan Kohberger into a punchline on social media, were the food complaints. In a formal complaint that was later obtained and published by People magazine, Bryan Kohberger wrote the following, and this is a direct quote. "I have on several occasions not received all items of food on my tray." He went on to claim that when he raised this issue with staff, he received no replacements and no explanation. Now let's talk about what this complaint actually means. Prison food is notoriously bad. Everyone knows that. It's institutional food prepared in bulk for hundreds of inmates. It's not gourmet, it's not fresh, it's not delicious, but it is required to meet certain nutritional standards. Inmates must receive a certain number of calories per day. Meals must include protein, carbohydrates, vegetables, fruit, and there are accommodations for religious dietary restrictions, medical dietary needs, and yes, even vegan diets. Bryan Kohberger is a devout vegan, meaning he doesn't consume any animal products. No meat, no dairy, no eggs, no honey. The Idaho Department of Correction does provide vegan meal options. They have to. But Kohberger claimed he wasn't receiving all the items on his tray. Was this true? Was he actually being shorted food? Or was he complaining because the portions weren't what he expected, because the food wasn't to his liking, because something was missing that he thought should be there? We don't know. Prison officials didn't elaborate on the specifics of his complaint, but they clearly didn't find merit in it, because Kohberger continued to receive the same meals as every other vegan inmate. But the complaint that really captured the internet's attention, the complaint that turned Bryan Kohberger into a meme, was the banana complaint. According to reports from multiple sources, Bryan Kohberger complained about the quality of the fruit he was receiving in his meals, and specifically, he complained about the type of bananas being served. Not that he wasn't getting bananas, not that the bananas were rotten or spoiled, but that he objected to the type of bananas. Were they too ripe? Not ripe enough? Were they the wrong variety? Were they bruised? Were they not organic? Prison officials never elaborated. They didn't dignify the complaint with a detailed response. But the fact that Bryan Kohberger, a man convicted of brutally stabbing 4 innocent college students 150 times, was filing formal complaints about the quality of his bananas, the internet exploded. Headlines called him Jailhouse Karen. Social media users mocked him mercilessly. He didn't complain when he was stabbing Kaylee Goncalves 38 times, but God forbid the bananas aren't perfect. One Twitter user wrote, "Imagine being so entitled that you murder 4 people and then complain about produce in prison." Another said, "Bryan Kohberger is really out here writing complaint forms about bananas, while Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan are in graves. I hope every banana he gets for the rest of his life is either rock hard or complete mush." The dark humor reflected what many people were feeling. Here was a man who had shown absolutely no remorse for the lives he took, who had smiled in a selfie hours after committing quadruple murder, who had caused unimaginable suffering to 4 families, and he was complaining about bananas. For Bryan Kohberger, though, these complaints weren't trivial. They were about control, or rather, the loss of control. In his previous life, if he didn't like his food, he could go to a different restaurant, cook something else, order delivery. He had choices. He had control. But in prison, you eat what you're given. You don't get to choose. You don't get to complain about flavor or texture or ripeness. You eat what's on your tray or you go hungry. And for a man whose entire personality was built on control, on being particular, on things being exactly the way he wanted them, these small losses of control were intolerable. The bananas weren't really about the bananas. They were about power, or the lack of it. And Bryan Kohberger was learning very quickly that in prison, he has no power at all. But the food complaints, as ridiculous as they seemed to the outside world, were nothing compared to what happened next. Because in August 2025, just weeks into his stay at Idaho Maximum Security Institution, Bryan Kohberger discovered something that truly terrified him. He wasn't safe. Even in solitary confinement, even separated from other inmates by steel doors and concrete walls, he was being targeted. Other inmates were harassing him, and they were doing it in a way that guards couldn't prevent. Through the vents. J-Block is designed to keep inmates separated. The cells are arranged along corridors with solid steel doors. Inmates can't see each other. They can't physically interact. They can't pass notes or items. They're supposed to be isolated. But the building has a ventilation system. As all buildings do, air needs to circulate, and sound travels through the vents. Inmates discovered long ago that if you shout into the vent in your cell, inmates in nearby cells can hear you. It's muffled, it's echoing, but it's audible. And some inmates, once they learned that Bryan Kohberger was in J-Block, once they learned which cell he was in, started using the vents to send him messages, day and night, around the clock, relentless. In his complaint filed in August 2025, Bryan Kohberger reported that other inmates were shouting sexual threats at him through the ventilation system. He said he could hear them constantly. He said it was affecting his ability to sleep, his mental state, his sense of safety, and he provided specific examples of what was being said. According to his complaint, one inmate yelled, "I'll bitch fuck you." Another inmate shouted, "The only ass we'll be eating is Kohberger's." These weren't idle threats or trash talk. In prison, especially in a facility like Idaho Maximum Security, sexual violence is a very real danger. And for someone like Bryan Kohberger, a child killer who's at the absolute bottom of the prison hierarchy, the threat was credible. If he were ever in general population, If he were ever in a situation where other inmates had access to him, he would almost certainly be assaulted, possibly killed. A corrections officer later confirmed, in an incident notification report that was also obtained by media outlets, that he had personally heard vulgar language being used and directed towards Kohberger through the vents. So the harassment was real. It was happening. The officer witnessed it. But here was the problem. The officer couldn't identify which inmates were making the threats. The voices were muffled, echoing through the ventilation system. They could be coming from multiple cells. The inmates knew that guards couldn't pinpoint exactly who was shouting, so they could harass Kohberger with relative impunity. As long as they didn't do it when guards were standing right at their cell door, as long as they timed it right, they could torment him endlessly. A housing placement hearing was scheduled for mid-August 2025. This is a formal meeting where prison officials, mental health staff, and the inmate discuss the inmate's housing situation. Is he safe where he is? Does he need to be moved? Are there concerns? During this hearing, Bryan Kohberger and prison officials agreed on something that probably surprised no one. Kohberger should remain in segregated housing. He should not be moved to general population. He should not have contact with other inmates. For his own safety, he needed to stay in solitary confinement. But staying in solitary didn't stop the harassment. The inmates continued to shout through the vents, day and night. Threats, taunts, promises of what they'd do to him if they ever got the chance. By December 2025, 5 months into his incarceration, Bryan Kohberger reached what appeared to be a breaking point. According to sources who spoke to media outlets, Kohberger told guards that he would harm himself unless they moved him away from the inmates who were tormenting him. He threatened self-harm. Think about what that means. Bryan Kohberger, a man who showed absolutely no remorse for murdering 4 people, a man who took a smiling selfie hours after stabbing 4 college students to death, a man who expressed no emotion when the families of his victims confronted him in court, was now threatening to harm himself because other inmates were calling him names through the vents. He could handle killing 4 people. He could handle being arrested, prosecuted, convicted, but he couldn't handle being taunted by other prisoners. This tells us something important about Kohberger's psychology. The murders weren't about rage or loss of control. They were calculated, planned, controlled. He was in control when he killed those 4 students. He was the one with power. But in prison, he has no control. He has no power. Other inmates are mocking him, threatening him, and he can't stop them. He can't control the situation. And that powerlessness, that inability to make it stop, is breaking him. In total, Bryan Kohberger filed 5 formal grievances in his first few weeks at Idaho Maximum Security Institution. 5. About JPay access, about supply bags, about food portions, about banana quality, about harassment through the vents, 5 complaints in a matter of weeks. And prison staff were growing tired of him. Every complaint requires investigation, documentation, response. Every threat of self-harm requires evaluation by mental health staff, additional monitoring, paperwork. Every housing placement hearing requires multiple staff members to take time out of their schedules to sit down and assess the situation. And remember, Idaho Maximum Security Institution is already understaffed and underfunded, like most American prisons. Guards are overworked. Mental health staff are stretched thin. Resources are limited. And now they have Bryan Kohberger, who seems to file a complaint every time something doesn't go exactly the way he wants. Former homicide detective Chris McDonough, who has been following Kohberger's case closely and who has sources with knowledge of the situation inside Idaho's correctional system, used a very specific word to describe how prison staff view Bryan Kohberger. Prima donna. That's the word they used. A prima donna is someone who's temperamental, demanding, difficult to work with, someone who expects special treatment and throws a fit when they don't get it. And that, according to multiple sources, is exactly how Bryan Kohberger is behaving in prison. He expects things to work on his schedule. He expects his complaints to be taken seriously no matter how trivial. He expects accommodation and attention. And when he doesn't get what he wants, he files another complaint. He makes another demand. He creates another problem for staff to deal with. McDonough said prison officials told him they're fed up with Kohberger's behavior. They're tired of the constant complaints. They're exhausted by the daily disruptions. They're frustrated that managing one inmate is consuming so much time and so many resources. And that frustration led to something that rarely happens in the American prison system: discussions about transferring a high-profile inmate to another state. But before we get to those transfer rumors, we need to talk about something else that happened in August 2025. Something that shocked everyone, including the Idaho Department of Correction. Someone inside the prison recorded Bryan Kohberger on video and leaked it to the public. In August 2025, a video appeared online. It was grainy, shot from a distance, but there was no mistaking who it showed. Bryan Kohberger, inside Idaho Maximum Security Institution. The video spread like wildfire across social media. True crime communities on Reddit, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, all of them started analyzing every frame. What was Kohberger doing in the video? Where exactly was he? Who filmed it? How did it get out? News outlets picked up the story. Major publications wrote articles about the leaked video. Millions of people watched it, and the Idaho Department of Correction was furious. At first, they tried to claim that the video might not be real. Some officials suggested it could be AI-generated, a deepfake, not actually showing Kohberger at all. In 2025, AI-generated videos are sophisticated enough that it's plausible. Maybe someone had created a fake video to get attention, to spread misinformation. But then, an internal email leaked, and it confirmed that the video was real. The email was from Derek, the director of the Idaho Department of Correction, sent to all prison staff at Idaho Maximum Security Institution. The subject line was something like security breach investigation. And in the email, Director Derek wrote, and I'm paraphrasing based on reports, these videos appear to be taken from inside IMSI. We are taking this matter very seriously. We will be conducting a full investigation to determine how this breach occurred and who is responsible. This was not AI. This was not fake. This was real video footage of Bryan Kohberger inside Idaho Maximum Security Institution, shot by someone, leaked to the public, and the Idaho Department of Correction had no idea who did it. They released a public statement shortly after the video went viral. The statement said, in part, videotaping and publicly sharing security footage is prohibited conduct, and we will be reviewing all legal options, including criminal prosecution. Anyone found responsible for this breach will be held fully accountable under Idaho law. They promised a thorough investigation. They promised consequences. They promised that whoever did this would be caught and punished. But as of January 2026, 5 months after the video leaked, the Idaho Department of Correction still hasn't identified who was responsible. They still don't know who filmed it. They still don't know how it got out. Think about what that means. Idaho Maximum Security Institution is a maximum security facility. There are cameras everywhere. There are protocols for everything. There are rules about what staff can and cannot do, what they can and cannot bring into the facility. Filming inmates on personal devices is absolutely prohibited. Security footage is carefully controlled and can only be accessed by authorized personnel for authorized purposes. And yet someone somehow managed to record one of the most high-profile inmates in the entire country and leak that video to the world. And they got away with it. There are a few possibilities. Maybe it was a corrections officer who was fed up with Kohberger's complaints and wanted to humiliate him by showing the world what he looks like in prison. Maybe it was a staff member who was sympathetic to the victims' families and wanted to give them some satisfaction by showing Kohberger in his diminished state. Maybe it was someone who just wanted attention, who wanted to be the person who leaked the video that went viral. Or maybe it was an accident. Someone recorded something for a legitimate reason, and it got out without them realizing. We don't know. And apparently the Idaho Department of Correction doesn't know either. What we do know is that for Bryan Kohberger, this was yet another loss of control, yet another humiliation, yet another reminder that he's not special, he's not untouchable, he's not in control of anything anymore. He's just another prisoner in a system that doesn't care about his privacy, his dignity, or his feelings. He's entertainment for the masses. He's a spectacle. And there's nothing he can do about it. He can't file a complaint that will get the video taken down. He can't demand better security. He can't control what happens to footage of him. He's powerless, and that powerlessness is eating him alive. But while the leaked video scandal was embarrassing for the Idaho Department of Correction, while it raised questions about security and protocols, it also highlighted a bigger problem. Bryan Kohberger is a massive burden on the system. He's high profile, which means everything involving him has to be carefully documented and managed. He files constant complaints, which means staff time is constantly being consumed responding to him. He's a target for other inmates, which means he requires extra security and monitoring. He's exactly the kind of inmate that a struggling, understaffed, underfunded prison system doesn't want. And by January 2026, rumors started circulating that Idaho was trying to get rid of him. Former homicide detective Chris McDonough broke the story on his podcast in January 2026. McDonough has covered the Idaho murders case extensively since the beginning. He has sources inside law enforcement, inside the court system, and inside Idaho's correctional system. And in January, those sources told him something shocking. Idaho officials were actively trying to transfer Bryan Kohberger to an out-of-state prison. McDonough said, and this is as close to a direct quote as I can get from listening to his podcast, "They're trying to make it happen." It wouldn't be surprising if, within 30 days, Kohberger has been transferred elsewhere, or a decision has been reached about whether or not to get him out of there. He said prison officials were using very specific language when discussing the transfer. They used the word aggressively. They're aggressively pursuing options to transfer Kohberger to another state. They're aggressively negotiating with other prison systems. They're aggressively trying to make this happen as quickly as possible. McDonough said his sources told him that officials were essentially saying, "What are we going to do with this guy?" The plan, according to McDonough's sources, was to reach out to multiple states and see if any of them would be willing to take Bryan Kohberger. Interstate prison transfers do happen, though they're not common. Usually they occur when an inmate needs specialized medical care that's not available in their home state, or when an inmate's safety cannot be guaranteed, and moving them is the only option, or when there are space issues and overcrowding. But transferring a high-profile inmate because he's annoying, because he files too many complaints, that's extremely rare. Yet according to McDonough's sources, that's exactly what Idaho wanted to do. Multiple states were allegedly being approached. Conversations were happening. Negotiations were underway. Idaho was willing to pay to transfer him. They were willing to handle all the logistics. They just wanted him gone. Why would Idaho be so desperate to get rid of Bryan Kohberger? Well, according to sources who spoke to multiple media outlets, prison staff at Idaho Maximum Security Institution are absolutely fed up with him. They're tired of the constant complaints about JPay access, supply bags, food portions, banana quality, harassment from other inmates. They're exhausted by the daily management that Kohberger requires. Every grievance he files has to be investigated. Someone has to read the complaint, look into the issue, document what happened, write a response, and file everything appropriately. That takes time. That takes staff resources. And when you have an inmate filing 5 complaints in his first few weeks, that's a significant drain on resources. Then there's the security concern. Kohberger is a target. Other inmates want to hurt him. That means he can never be in general population. He can never be in a situation where other inmates have access to him. He requires constant monitoring, extra security, special housing. All of that costs money and requires staff attention. Then there's the media attention. As long as Bryan Kohberger is in Idaho, the Idaho murders case stays in the headlines. Every little thing that happens with him becomes a news story. The leaked video, international news. The banana complaints, viral on social media. The transfer rumors, major headlines. Idaho can't move on from this case as long as Kohberger is sitting in an Idaho prison. Every development, every incident, every complaint keeps the case alive in the public consciousness. And some sources suggested that Idaho officials would prefer to have this chapter closed. They got their conviction. They got their life sentences. They got justice for the victims. Now they'd like to move on. But they can't, because Bryan Kohberger is still there, still causing problems, still making headlines. There's also the financial aspect. Managing a high-profile inmate is expensive. The extra security, the constant monitoring, the specialized housing, the staff time devoted to handling complaints, it all adds up. And Idaho's prison system is already struggling financially. Budget cuts, staffing shortages, aging facilities, all of the problems that plague prison systems across America. Adding the burden of managing Bryan Kohberger on top of everything else is a strain they'd rather not have. So the rumors suggested that Idaho was shopping Kohberger around, trying to find another state willing to take him, offering to cover transfer costs, promising to handle all the paperwork, anything to get him out of Idaho. But there's one big problem with transferring an inmate to another state. The receiving state has to agree. They have to be willing to take custody of the inmate, to house him in their facility, to take on all the responsibilities and costs. And most states don't want high-profile inmates, especially ones with reputations for being difficult. So the negotiations were allegedly difficult. Some states said no immediately. Others expressed interest, but wanted guarantees about costs, about security, about what would happen if problems arose. It's not as simple as putting Kohberger on a bus and sending him to another state. There are legal requirements, interstate compacts, agreements that have to be signed. And according to McDonough, all of this was happening behind the scenes in January 2026. Idaho was trying to make it happen quickly. They wanted a decision within 30 days. They wanted Kohberger transferred as soon as possible. But then, on January 28, 2026, the Idaho Department of Correction issued an official statement that seemed to directly contradict everything McDonough's sources had told him. A spokesman for the Idaho Department of Correction spoke to U.S. Weekly and other media outlets, and he said very clearly, IDOC is not considering a move for Bryan Kohberger. He will likely remain at Idaho Maximum Security Institution for the rest of his natural life. We have no plans to transfer him to another state. End of story. So which is it? Is Idaho trying to get rid of Bryan Kohberger, or is he staying in Idaho forever? Are McDonough's sources wrong? Or is the official statement a cover, a way to shut down the media speculation while negotiations continue privately? A former FBI agent who specializes in threat assessment programs and who spoke to the media about this situation said that interstate prison transfers of high-profile inmates do happen, and they're often kept very quiet until they're finalized. He said it's not unusual for prison systems to publicly deny transfer plans while privately pursuing them. Because if you announce publicly that you're trying to transfer an inmate, it can complicate the negotiations. The receiving state might back out. The media attention might increase. The inmate might file legal challenges. So often, transfers are negotiated quietly, behind closed doors, and only announced once everything is finalized and the inmate is already being moved. McDonough stands by his sources. He insists that as of January 2026, Idaho officials were aggressively trying to transfer Bryan Kohberger to another state. He says the conversations were real, the negotiations were happening, and a decision could come at any time. But as of February 2026, Bryan Kohberger remains in J Block at Idaho Maximum Security Institution. He's still in solitary confinement. He's still prisoner Wixteen 3214. He's still filing complaints. He's still being harassed through the vents. He's still in Idaho. Whether that will change in the coming weeks or months, we don't know. But what we do know is that Bryan Kohberger's life in prison is not what he expected. It's not what anyone expects prison to be like. Unless you've actually spent time in solitary confinement or studied it extensively, let me walk you through what Bryan Kohberger's daily life actually looks like, in detail, hour by hour, because understanding his routine helps us understand why this is breaking him down mentally and emotionally. Bryan Kohberger wakes up when the lights come on. He doesn't control this. Guards control the lights from outside his cell. One moment it's dark, he's sleeping, and then suddenly fluorescent light floods his cell. Maybe it's 6 a.m., maybe it's 5:30 a.m. It doesn't matter because he has no say in when his day starts. He opens his eyes. He sees the same concrete walls, the same gray paint, the same metal bed frame he went to sleep looking at. He sits up. His back probably hurts because prison mattresses are thin, barely padded, designed for durability, not comfort. He uses the toilet, which is right there in his cell, just a few feet from where he sleeps. No privacy, no separate bathroom, just a stainless steel toilet attached to the wall. He washes his face in the stainless steel sink. The water is cold, always cold. He sits on his bed, and he waits. Sometime in the next hour or two, breakfast will arrive. He hears the cart rolling down the corridor, the sound of trays sliding through door slots. Other inmates getting their meals. Then his door slot opens. A tray is pushed through. The slot closes. He takes the tray. He looks at what's on it. Oatmeal, maybe. Or cold cereal. A piece of fruit, possibly the dreaded banana. A carton of milk or juice. For Kohberger, the vegan, it's whatever the prison provides for vegan diets. He eats sitting on his bed or at the small metal desk. He eats alone, in silence. No conversation, no distraction, just him and his thoughts. When he's finished, he waits until he hears the cart coming back around. The slot opens. He hands the tray back. The slot closes. Now what? Now he has hours. Empty hours. He can read if he has books. Inmates are allowed to order books from the prison library system, though selections are limited, and it can take time for requests to be fulfilled. Maybe Kohberger has some books. Maybe he's reading about criminal psychology, revisiting the theories he studied in graduate school. Maybe he's reading fiction to escape. Maybe he's reading legal texts, even though he waived his right to appeal, looking for some loophole, some way out. Or maybe he just stares at the walls. He can write if he has paper and a pencil, which inmates can request. Maybe he's writing letters to his family. Maybe he's writing his thoughts, trying to process what his life has become. Or maybe he's writing complaints, drafting his next grievance about whatever minor inconvenience is bothering him today. He can do push-ups or sit-ups if he wants exercise. The cell is small, but there's enough room to do basic calisthenics. But how motivated is he? How much energy does he have? Solitary confinement is known to cause depression, lethargy, a loss of motivation. It's hard to care about staying fit when you're spending 23 hours a day in a concrete box. He can pace, 5 steps from one end of the cell to the other, turn, 5 steps back, turn, 5 steps, turn. Some inmates in solitary walk miles every day just pacing their cells, trying to burn energy, trying to feel like they're doing something. He can think, and think, and think. About what? About the murders? About Kaylee, Madison, Xana, Ethan? Does he feel remorse? Does he replay that night in his mind? Or does he think about his old life, being a PhD student, teaching classes, having freedom? Does he fantasize about what he'd do if he could escape? Or has he already resigned himself to the reality that this is his life now and forever? Hours pass. The lights stay on. He has no way to tell time unless he's been allowed a watch, which is unlikely in maximum security. He doesn't know if it's 10 a.m. or 2 p.m. Time blurs. Eventually, he hears activity in the corridor. Guards approaching. Keys jangling. Maybe it's his turn for outdoor recreation. A guard stops at his cell door. An order is barked through the door. Turn around, hands through the slot. Kohberger stands up, turns his back to the door, and puts his hands through the small slot. He feels the cold metal of handcuffs being locked around his wrists. His hands are now cuffed behind his back. The door unlocks. A loud clang echoes as the steel door swings open. 2 guards are standing there. They're professional but firm. One of them bends down and attaches ankle shackles to Kohberger's legs. The shackles are connected by a short chain, maybe 18 inches long. He can walk, but only in small shuffling steps. The guards escort him down the corridor. He shuffles, his movement restricted by the chains. He sees other cell doors, but they're closed. He doesn't see other inmates. He hears them, though. Someone shouting something unintelligible. Someone banging on a door. The cacophony of prison. They reach a secure door. A guard unlocks it. They go through. Another corridor, another door, more unlocking, more corridors. And finally, they reach the outdoor recreation area. It's a concrete yard, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet. The ground is concrete. The walls surrounding it are concrete, maybe 30 feet high, topped with razor wire. There's no roof, so Kohberger can see the sky. A small patch of blue or gray, depending on the weather. That's his only connection to the outside world. That small patch of sky. The guards remove his handcuffs but leave the ankle shackles on. They step back and position themselves by the door. They're watching him, and a security camera is watching him too. He has 1 hour. 1 hour of outdoor recreation. What does he do? He can walk in circles, round and round the small concrete yard. He can do jumping jacks if the ankle shackles allow it. He can do push-ups on the cold concrete. He can stand in the middle and look up at the sky. He can close his eyes and feel the wind if there's any breeze. In winter, it's freezing. In summer, the concrete radiates heat. There's no shade, no bench to sit on, just concrete and sky. 1 hour passes. It feels both too long and too short. The guards approach, turn around, hands behind your back. The handcuffs go back on. The door opens. He's escorted back through the corridors, back to his cell. The ankle shackles are removed once he's inside. The handcuffs are removed through the door slot. The door slams shut. Click. Locked again. And he's alone. The rest of the day stretches ahead. More empty hours. Lunch arrives through the slot at some point. He eats. The tray is taken away. More hours. Maybe he lies on his bed and stares at the ceiling. Maybe he does more push-ups. Maybe he reads. Maybe he writes. Maybe he just sits there, thinking, remembering, regretting, or not. We don't know what goes through his mind. Dinner arrives. He eats. The tray is taken away. Eventually the lights dim. Not completely off, because in solitary confinement the lights are never completely off. There's always some illumination for security reasons. But they dim enough to signal that it's night. Time to sleep. He lies down on the thin mattress. He closes his eyes. And he tries to sleep in a cell where the lights are never fully dark, where the air is recycled and stale, where the temperature is controlled by someone else, where any sound might be another inmate shouting threats through the vents. This is every single day, day after day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. The only variation is every other day instead of outdoor recreation, he gets a shower. Same process, handcuffs, ankle shackles, escorted to the shower area, 10 minutes of cold water, escorted back. That's the only variation, that's his life, and it's driving him insane. Because Bryan Kohberger's entire personality, his entire identity, was built on control, on planning, on being smarter than everyone else, on being special. And prison has stripped all of that away. He's not special. He's prisoner 1163214. He's not in control. He controls nothing. He's not smarter than everyone else. He's just another inmate with nothing but time. Investigative reporter Howard Blum, who I mentioned earlier, gave one of the most insightful analyses of why prison is so difficult for someone like Kohberger. Blum has covered numerous criminal cases over his career and has studied the psychology of murderers extensively. In an interview with the Daily Mail, Blum said, "Murder is about control, and prison is the ultimate situation where you have no control. His self-important personality is preventing him from adapting. Kohberger is narcissistic," Blum explained. "He believes he's superior to others. He believed he could commit the perfect crime. He believed he was smarter than investigators. He believed the rules didn't apply to him. And now he's in an environment where none of that matters, where he has no power, where he's at the mercy of corrections officers, prison officials, other inmates." Psychologists who study solitary confinement have documented the severe mental health effects it causes: depression, anxiety, hallucinations, paranoia, cognitive decline. Even just a few weeks in solitary can have lasting effects. Bryan Kohberger has been in solitary since July 2025. As of February 2026, that's 7 months, and he's going to be there for the rest of his life. Decades in that cell, 40, 50, maybe 60 more years if he lives that long. What will that do to him mentally? How long before he completely breaks? Or has he already broken? The constant complaints, the inability to adapt, the threats of self-harm, these might all be signs that he's already falling apart. And here's the thing, he did this to himself. He chose to murder 4 innocent people. He chose to stab them over 150 times. He chose to take that selfie. He chose to fight extradition. He chose to maintain his innocence for 2.5 years. And ultimately, he chose to plead guilty to avoid the death penalty. He made all of those choices. And now he's living with the consequences. For the families of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, knowing that Bryan Kohberger is suffering in prison provides some small measure of comfort. It's not enough. It will never be enough. Their children are gone forever. Kaylee will never graduate college, never start her marketing job in Texas, never fall in love, never have children of her own. Madison will never achieve her dreams, never experience all the things she should have experienced. Xana will never finish her education, never build the life she was working toward. Ethan will never grow into the man he could have become. They're gone. And nothing Bryan Kohberger experiences in prison will ever bring them back. But there is some justice in knowing that the man who took everything from them is now living in hell. That every day he wakes up with nothing. No freedom, no future, no control, no comfort. Just concrete walls and the memory of what he did. Steve Goncalves, Kaylee's father, said it best at the sentencing hearing. After years of fighting for justice, after years of keeping his daughter's case in the public eye, after years of pain and grief that most of us can't even imagine, Steve Goncalves stood in that courtroom and told Bryan Kohberger exactly what he needed to hear. The world is watching because of the kids, not because of you. Nobody cares about you. And he was absolutely right. Bryan Kohberger wanted to be remembered. He wanted to be infamous. He wanted to be the subject of true crime documentaries and books and articles. He wanted people to study him, to try to understand him, to see him as some kind of criminal genius. And yes, people are studying the case, but not the way he wanted. He's not remembered as brilliant. He's remembered as the guy who complained about bananas. He's remembered as the PhD student who thought he was smarter than everyone, but left his DNA at the crime scene. He's remembered as the coward who killed 4 sleeping college students and then smiled about it. He's remembered as prisoner 163214, filing grievance forms about supply bags and JPay access while 4 families mourn children who will never come home. And the 4 victims? They're remembered the way they should be, as real people, as beloved daughters and sons, as friends who brought light into every room, as students with bright futures ahead of them, as individuals who mattered, who were loved, who are missed every single day. Kaylee Goncalves, who was weeks away from graduating, who had that marketing job waiting for her in Texas, who was best friends with Madison since 6th grade. Madison Mogen, who was so excited about moving to Boise after graduation, who had her whole life planned out, who was described by everyone as kind and caring. Xana Kernodle, who was working so hard to pay her way through school, who fought back against her attacker, who died trying to protect herself and Ethan. Ethan Chapin, who was just visiting his girlfriend, who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, who had no idea that night would be his last. These are the people who matter. These are the names that should be remembered. And their families will never stop saying their names, will never stop honoring their memories, will never stop making sure the world knows that Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan were real people whose lives mattered. As for Bryan Kohberger, he will spend the rest of his life in that 12 by 7 foot cell. He will spend approximately 16,790 more days in solitary confinement if he lives to average life expectancy. 16,790 days of concrete walls and fluorescent lights, of handcuffs and ankle shackles, of meals through a door slot, of 1 hour in a concrete yard, of showers every other day, of complaints about bananas and JPay access that nobody cares about, of harassment through the vents from inmates who hate him, of leaked videos and media attention and being a punchline on social media. He will wake up every day knowing that he controls nothing, that he's powerless, that he's not special, that he's just another prisoner who made terrible choices and is now living with the consequences. And for the families of his victims, that's exactly what justice looks like. Bryan Kohberger will spend the rest of his life in hell. And for Kaylee's family, Madison's family, Xana's family, Ethan's family, that's exactly where he belongs. If this case impacted you, if you want to continue following cases like this with respect for victims and verified facts, please subscribe to Forensic Disconnect. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an investigation. We don't sensationalize. We don't exploit. We educate with dignity and respect for those who have lost their lives. The Idaho murders changed 4 families forever. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin. Make sure their story is never forgotten. Hit that like button if this video provided you with information you didn't have before. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you think Bryan Kohberger deserves the conditions he's experiencing in prison? Do you think Idaho should transfer him to another state? Do you think justice has been served? Share your thoughts respectfully, remembering that 4 real families are still grieving. And most importantly, say their names. Kaylee, Madison, Xana, Ethan. They were real people. They had real futures. They deserved to live, and we will never forget them.